Volcanic eruptions affect more people long after the eruptions are over, but this can be avoided. This is on phys.org by Jenny Barkley, Roger Fu, and Teresa Armitage Bueno from The Conversation. Montserrat Soufriere Hills Volcanic Eruption 2009, credit by Jonathan Stone, image. You may think of volcanic eruptions as spectacular, but brief explosions. In reality, these destructive forces wreak havoc before headlines are made and continue long after they fade from the news. As our new research shows, it's the drawn-out nature of volcanic eruptions that can be most fatal, and understanding why is the key to saving lives. Most commonly, volcanoes will emit pulses of gas and solids for 6 to 7 weeks, with quite fizzling and rumbling punctuation by more invisible bouts of activity. Some go on for years and even decades. The recent fatal explosion at the Italian island of Stromboli, part of the eruptive sequence, officially began in 1934, but it stretches back millennia, thousands of years. The Romans referred to the island as the lighthouse of the Mediterranean because it was always lighting up with magma and eruptions. But despite this sustained risk, many who live within the reach of volatile volcanoes choose to stay in high hazard zones during an eruption, and they're risking their lives. Studies report that between 15 and 85% of the evacuated populations revisit dangerous areas while the warnings are still in place. However, research examining why so many choose to do so is limited. To better understand how to protect lives and livelihoods in the wake of eruptions, we investigated the impacts of past eruptions on the communities around volcanoes with a three-pronged approach. Reporting on what happens to entire populations during eruptions can be a bit patchy, but what is usually well covered is when people have lost their lives or where and what they were doing. We examined the circumstances of this from all eruptions globally with available data over a 30-year period, and we also conducted detailed interviews with people who had experienced prolonged volcanic activity in Latin America and in the Caribbean. Finally, we compiled analysis existing case studies of communities affected by recent eruptions to understand the relevant data they had uncovered. Data on deaths showed that there were warnings. The warnings were in place, but the people didn't take them into account. About 75% of the fatalities happened inside the zone where people had been asked to leave the area or to stay away from the area. More than 90% of these people who were either protecting their assets or engaged in activities that contributed to their livelihoods, farming for instance, more than 70% of the fatalities happened a week or more after the initial eruption, despite warnings being given to them. They decided not to follow the warnings. Interviews gave us more insight into the pressures that might have led to those risky decisions. Most people who chose to return to evacuation areas were aware of the risks, but pressures to protect livelihoods and well-being override those considerations. Many returned to look after property, animals, or crops. Some people simply wanted to protect and be with their community and to seek solace in their home. Few just returned out of curiosity. Difficult conditions in evacuation shelters also contribute. After Soufriere Hills volcano on Montserrat began to erupt in 1995, some people lived for months in refugees camps where supplies of fresh vegetables were in short supply. And by 1997, some were returning to the evacuated zone to tend to their crops in an attempt to provide not only their families, but others too. In June of that year, 19 people lost their lives during an upsurge in activity in the exclusion zone. Now, saving lives and livelihoods, what ours and the other studies realized showed that promoting awareness of the sustained risk of volcanoes is a good start, But it's not enough to ensure people's safety. Evacuation strategies also need to find ways of minimizing long-term impacts on livelihoods and well-being, especially when they last for more than a few days. For example, authorities could provide alternative pasture for animals or ensure market prices don't fall if they have to sell them. Allowing populations at risk to anticipate sudden changes in activity would also be helpful. The better we can forecast sudden upsurges in activity, the less disruption there will be to affect the populations. Scientists are hopeful that new technologies such as drones, space-based monitoring, and better microanalysis of erupted rocks will soon allow us to better detect when unrest turns to more violent eruptions, and just as importantly, when a volcano will settle for a long period of time. Improving communication networks in at-risk areas is also crucial for improving forecasting to be used. Of course, most important of all is that the strategies are designed by working collaboratively with and for the communities at risk. There are already some wonderful examples where scientists, authorities, communities collaborate to share and rapidly transmit information when activity changes. For example, at Tungurahua in Ecuador, the watchers, quote-unquote, have direct radio contact with the local observatory and are trusted members of their community. And this network enables populations to respond rapidly when the volcano started generating pyroclastic flows between 2006 and 2014. So all of this applies not just to volcanoes, but other protracted hazards such as flooding, coastal erosion, landslides, many of which we will face with increased frequency in the future. By truly understanding and addressing what drives people to return to dangerous zones and helping them anticipate times of extreme risk, we can save countless lives and countless more livelihoods. This was by The Conversation. It's on phys.org. If you'd like to join me on my Patreon account, you will hear content not covered by mainstream media. These riveting stories will be based on my research, and I will state my opinions and give my personal insight on diverse and controversial subjects and world events not covered by mainstream media, and not supported by YouTube guidelines. So whatever I have on my Patreon, most of those will not be on my YouTube channel. Please consider becoming a member today. More of the most significant and important videos will be on my Patreon channel. Your support helps me to continue my research and keeps this YouTube channel alive. And we depend on your support, your generous charity, because we help economically challenged families here in Athens, Greece, in Kapota, and we also help the young generation with university tuition and the community around our church. Thank you.